Hi, I am Paige Lynn. I am a grad student at Morningside University, and I teach second grade at a small town in northwest Iowa called Sibley, Ocheyedan. My research was on the effect of diverse literature on the empathy level of second grade students. The problem I wanted to address is that bullying and racism is a large and growing issue, not as a growing issue in the world outside of the school, but it is also a growing issue at ages as low as 4. We are seeing it more and more in the elementary, and so this is why it is becoming a large issue. And a large cause of that would be the lack of empathy that students have for each other. We are seeing that at the younger age as well, that there is some learned racism and discrimination in these students already by the time they get to elementary school. So the lack of empathy is huge, and we need to find a way to change that. One past study is of African American students under the age of 10 and asking them if they had experienced some form of racism. In these students, 92% of them said that they had experienced some form of racism, and these are all under the age of 10, so under the age of 5th grade. That is mostly elementary school, and so this is showing that at a younger age, students are experiencing it, and most of the time, not just once. It's not just a one occurring time. It is multiple times, and it is reoccurring. Bernstein did a study of 277 students. This was from the ages of 8 to 18, so a little bit older. And they were situational questions such as walking through a mall, asking the students, have you experienced racism walking through a mall? 245 students answered yes to at least one of the situations. So that is 88% of those 277 students had experienced some form of discrimination in one of the situations. That is a large number of those students, and 8 to 18 years old, that is still before graduating high school. So that's before they even enter the rest of the community and the rest of the world. The purpose of this study is that mental health is a rising issue. We used to see it only in kind of the older ages, but now it being at the elementary school, we need to find a way and try and stop that before it becomes an issue. Bernstein did another research on 40 research papers and research studies that were relating mental health to discrimination with in bullying and racism. And 26 of these research papers had shown that there is a mental health disorder in those students that have experienced discrimination in some way or some type. These are also directly related to lower grades and test scores. These students are connected to those lower grades and lower test scores, and it is creating a negative school community. It is making those students not want to come to school, and it's not making them comfortable around their peers, not knowing what kind of situations they're going to get in or how they're going to be discriminated against when they are at school. Ford made a great point that teaching against racism is necessary. We're kind of having to go backwards. So at some point in time, these students had learned racism or learned discrimination, because we are not born that way. You're not born to discriminate against other people. And so we have to unlearn that. So we have to go backwards and unlearn what we have learned to be able to move forward and not discriminate. So Toomey and Storley did another study that was similar to the one that I did, but quite different in the fact that it is using a guidance counselor. A huge limitation to using a guidance counselor is their lack of exposure to the students. So most schools have a guidance class around 1 or 2 times a week, and it's only for about half an hour to 45 minutes at a time. So it's not their fault, but they just don't have that amount of exposure to be able to gain those relationships, those deep relationships with the students that they need to. The Toomey and Storley study used the theory of planned behavior. The theory of planned behavior says that they are going to repeat what they have learned or what they have done already. And so that is saying that if they have experienced or seen discrimination, they might be then prone to repeat it. Lack of time and consistency was a huge limitation to this study, just because of the use of a guidance counselor. So their lack of time exposure to the students, and the consistency if maybe a student wasn't there on their guidance day, that could be a huge limitation as well. Another thing that Toomey and Storley pointed out was that the impact is only as large as the teacher or counselor's empathy is large. So if the teacher or counselor lacks empathy themselves, then it's going to be really hard for them to be able to implement that in their classroom and teach empathy if they are not too prone to having empathy themselves. This study used the theory of mind, and that is Piaget, and that is putting yourself in their shoes. So that is being able to feel and understand the emotions and feelings that someone else might be feeling for their situation that they are going through. And it is to gain understanding into their feelings. So through this study, there is going to be exposure to diverse literature, diverse books, and they're going to try and make connections with the characters in the book to then create a connection that will make them have more empathy for the character and what they're going through by seeing it and seeing how the character reacts to it and seeing how they're feeling. So we're hoping to use literature to make that change. In this study, there was 6 weeks of the whole study. There was 3 weeks of control and 3 weeks of the intervention. 9 picture books were used in the 3 weeks of the intervention. These books were diverse. They were all diverse in a different way, whether it was race, whether it was socioeconomic status, family style, rural or urban living, male or female, all different kinds of books that have a different point of view from a different character that might be going through a situation that the students in the class probably aren't going through, to hopefully expose them so that they have more empathy for this the next time they see it. There were 16 participants in this study in 2nd grade. They were 7 to 8 years old at the time, and they are answering an empathy questionnaire. So these were questions like, when my mom is sad, then I get sad. So that's being able to understand someone else's feelings and maybe put yourself in their shoes, that theory of mind. They are answering on a scale of always, sometimes, or never. So a 0, 1, or 2, 2 being always and 0 being never. So there was 18 questions, so they had a range of scores from 0 to 36 if they answered all 2s or all 0s. They were answering this empathy questionnaire on day 1, day 15, and day 30. So that was before the control period, after the control period, and then again after the intervention period on day 30. What we're looking to do is compare each time they take it to the time before to see if any empathy growth has been made, if they are able to understand and feel those feelings with that person any more than the time before. The hypothesis from my research to gain was empathy level would increase post-intervention. So that third time they take the empathy questionnaire, the hypothesis was that time would increase compared to the last time, so that their empathy had grown post-intervention, post those 9 books being read, post those 3 weeks. The results did not support the hypothesis, and there's many limitations that show why that could have been, and there was not a positive change in the empathy level from post-control to post-intervention, so the second time taking it to the third time taking it. These graphs show the descriptive results on baseline, control, and intervention surveys. So the first time, the second time, and the third time taking it. The mean will show that from the baseline to the control, so the first to the second time, it increased about 1.5 points. So remember that there is a range from 0 to 36 points total from answering all 0s to all 2s. And the mean the first time was 21.438, and the mean the second time was right at 23. So it increased about 1.5 points on average. Then from control to post-intervention, post-control to post-intervention, there was almost a tenth of a point decrease. So that would show that their empathy level has actually gone down. The standard deviation did increase each time. And when we look at the t-score and p-value, there was an alpha level of 0.05 used. And the p-values of both baseline to control and control to intervention were both above that. So it shows that there is not a very accurate scores on those. The implications of this study is that literature is good. It does open those conversations to create empathy. More empathy, I felt, was gained from the conversations than was gained from the literature. The conversations can open up for students to share, for students to have conversations with each other where they learn about each other and learn what they have maybe gone through to be able to relate to one another, and they might be creating more empathy there. So that might be a future research idea as well. There are a few limitations to this study. The first is the length of the intervention. So there was only a specific amount of time that was available to be able to have this intervention. We did have to have a control period in there, so we split it up with 3 weeks before and 3 weeks of the intervention. And 6 weeks is just not a long time to be able to be consistent and to be impactful for what we needed to do to create empathy. Another limitation was the sample size. So having 16 students, it makes it easy for the results to sway one way or another, especially the mean based on an outlier. So the outliers can easily make if that day maybe a student was feeling really down and they answered mostly all zeros, they could have made the mean go down, and they could have been a large impact on why post-intervention the mean actually went down. Another limitation was the amount of literature. So that kind of goes along with the length of the intervention. If we could have had a longer intervention time, we could have had more literature and more books read, which then would have created more exposure to the different situations and the different characters that were in those stories, and that could have created more empathy for the students that were reading the books and being able to be part of the conversations. Another thing to think about was that students were absent some of the times. So if maybe a student got pulled out for speech every Friday at the time that we were doing the intervention, they would have missed out on 3 of the 9 books just with those 3 days. So they could students get pulled out for ELL, SPED, speech, different kinds of things, physical therapy that are not controllable and are out of our control. So that would affect the amount of exposure that they had to the literature, and that would take away a lot of the exposure right there. The amount of class time was also a limitation just because there was only a specific amount of time. So when it could have been a really great conversation being had, and then we ran out of time and we kind of had to stop there and not go back to it. So we could have created deeper conversation if there was more class time. To be able to have those conversations. So that is my research, and that is what I found. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. I look forward to hearing all of your guys's